knew it. I said last week when we had 60-degree weather that maybe I shouldn't put away my winter clothes just yet. And lo and behold, the region is blanketed in snow and ice once again. It's the last gasp of February. Coming up on this episode of The Eagle, we'll go over the top headline.
Yet another sign that the local officials might need to tighten up their procedures a little bit when it comes to the handling of forfeiture funds.
It's been a year since Russia invaded Ukraine. We'll reconnect with Ukrainian journalist Valery Garmash.
First of all, we are alive. We are still standing strong.
And we'll hear more from our ongoing Times Union podcast about the disappearance of Jalik Rainwalker.
And you could hear that there was something going on. Maybe the light was on of the van or whatever. You could hear there was something going on in the car.
This is The Eagle, a Times Union podcast, a look inside our newsroom. I'm Jessica Marshall.
If you're enjoying this podcast, take advantage of all the Times Union has to offer and support our efforts to bring you award-winning journalism by becoming a Times Union subscriber today. Go to timesunion.com/subscribe.
Welcome to The Eagle. I'm Jessica Marshall. All right, now let's discuss what appeared in the Times Union and on timesunion.com and our social channels this week. All right, back again are we with Times Union editor-in-chief Casey Seiler. Let's talk about the top stories this week. We'll start with the latest news that a body has been found in the Mohawk River in Schenectady. And that is giving everyone the vibe that it might be, but it hasn't been confirmed, that it might be the girl who went missing in November. What's the latest there?
Yeah, a body spotted by a couple of fishermen on Wednesday afternoon along a section of the Mohawk River where police really, spent months looking for 14-year-old Samantha Humphrey, who has been missing since late November. Just a terrible story. And what we know now, and we've got to say we're talking Thursday morning, is that a body was found. We do not know the gender. We don't know really anything else about it at this time because the police haven't put it out. But of course it is raising, and you're right to say vibe as opposed to hope or more likely dread, that this could provide an answer to what happened to Samantha Humphrey. But obviously, what we know for sure is that this is a fatality and a body that came out of the river in a spot that was key to this one search.
All right, well, we will have more updates on that, so stick by timesunion.com as that develops if we hear more from law enforcement on that. Let's move on to a story that involves the Albany County Sheriff's Office. An employee there is accused of embezzling a large sum of money in federal funds. Can you tell us more about that story?
Yeah, $68,000 to be exact. John Cox, who was the head of the county sheriff's business office, has been charged with grand larceny, 5 counts of forgery. This apparently came from the account that held federal forfeiture funds. Now, I should note that Steve Hughes, who did this story for us, has done yeoman's work looking into alleged misuse or sketchy use, shall we say, of both state and federal forfeiture funds and or in the offices of Albany County Sheriff Craig Apple and Albany County District Attorney David Soers. David Soers' office is currently paying back forfeiture funds that it acknowledged were not properly accounted for. They did not go back to the state addiction efforts as they were supposed to. Both of these cases, identified by the county controller, resulted in an audit by the feds, as one would expect, and it would appear that the alleged embezzlement by Mr. Cox was turned up as a result of that audit. So very interesting stuff there. And yet another sign that the local officials might need to tighten up their procedures a little bit when it comes to the handling of forfeiture funds.
Indeed, lots going on there. All right, let's move on to a story that I found personally very moving this week. It was a big story out of Albany Rural Cemetery. A Lakota girl is returning to her ancestral land. She's buried in Albany Rural Cemetery, but she's moving back to South Dakota. What happened there this week?
It is rare that we say there's big news out of a cemetery, but Paul Grandal, who is pretty much a past expert on all things Albany Rural Cemetery, which is, of course, one of the most beautiful and sprawling cemeteries in upstate. I think that's fair to say. Paul has written a book, These Exalted Acres, about Albany Rural. And, his latest column is sort of the fruit of that study. And yeah, this is the case of Sophie High Dog, who was a 10-year-old girl who died of tuberculosis in Albany in 1900, about 10 years into her life. And after she was taken from her Sioux family in South Dakota, one of many, many Native children who were yanked from their indigenous families. In Sophie High Dog's case, she was sent to the very notorious Indian school in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, that was known, like many of these institutions were, for serious abuse. And then died in Albany, buried in Albany Rural. And thanks really to the efforts of Paula Lemire, who is yet another scholar of Albany Rural. She is going to be repatriated in the spring, taken back to South Dakota. It as you say, it's a completely touching piece that Paul wrote.
Yes, and beautifully written. Highly recommend. Head over to timesunion.com to check out that story. All right, one last topic for today, and it involves food. If you've had a fish fry in the Capital Region, they are apparently a very unique type of fish fry, and we were trying to get to the bottom of why and how. So what can you tell us about fish fry that you can get in the Capital Region?
Yeah, Rose Schneider looked deep into the unique look and the shape of the fish fry that is so popular in the Capital Region, especially around Lent. These businesses, Ted's Fish Fry is one of the best known, is coming up for a busy weekend as we head into the Holy Week. And the amazing thing is that no one can kind of explain where these long, thin strips of whitefish that are, battered, fried, and then served on a hot dog bun comes from. That it's one of those things that everybody says it is what it is. It's described by Jerry Papandrea, who is a food critic on YouTube. He just says, I think it's just this accessible thing. And it's true. It's essentially like a fish fry hot dog, as it were. But, it looks like a humongous fish French fry, kind of. But and I got to say, Jess, I've lived in Albany for 23 years, and I've eaten a lot of fish and chips, but I've never had like a fish fry from a fish fry joint, and I'm a lapsed Catholic.
Yes, well, I was born here and have lived here for probably the majority of my life, and I don't understand it either, but it is delicious, and I'm kind of hungry now, and whenever it opens, I think I might go get one. So thanks for that.
No problem.
All right, Casey, thanks so much. We'll check back in with you next week.
Thanks, Jess.
As always, you can learn more about all of the topics and issues we discuss on this podcast at timesunion.com. February 24th marks 1 year since Russian troops invaded Ukraine. A year ago, Russia launched a full-scale invasion that focused initially on the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, and regions east and southeast. By mid-March, Russia had seized a quarter of the country. But Ukrainians resisted. Over the last year, they've held off and pushed back Russian forces, retaking territory that Russians had attempted to annex. Earlier this week, President Joe Biden flew to Kyiv to meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He announced that the U.S. would provide Ukraine $500 million in aid, in addition to heavy tanks that he promised last month. Last March, we connected with a Ukrainian journalist working in Slavyansk, a city in the embattled Donetsk region, near the Russian border. At the time, Valery Garmash, who is the editor of the Slavyansk-based news website 6262.com.ua, wasn't sure if he would have enough food or power and internet to continue to operate. But he and his team of 14 journalists have persevered in telling stories from the front lines. Times Union editor Casey Seiler recently reconnected with Garmash over Zoom to catch up. Here's a portion of their conversation.
So the big question, of course, is with the 1 year anniversary of the invasion, how would you kind of sum up?
We are alive. Ми жили. Это уже хорошо. Якщо дивитись на
First of all, we are alive. We are still standing strong. And actually, we broke the backbone of Russia. And we are so united to fight for our freedom and fight for the territories, for Ukrainian territories. We still have very strong belief that our victory is coming, and we are there to protect our country.
Ми маємо ще більшу віру в нашу перемогу. Це, на мій погляд, виглядає.
We put President Biden's visit to Kyiv on the front page of Tuesday's paper. I think that probably every other paper in the country put it there as well. What did that visit mean within Ukraine?
Так, я думаю, що взагалі те, що приїжджає президент Америки.
So my personal opinion is that this visit is not only to show the big support that the United States continues to provide to our country, but it's more to give the message to Russia that we are not left alone, Ukraine is not left alone, and all the countries that support us, around 50 countries in the world, they will continue this support, and that's the main message that I think comes out of this very important visit, both for our country and for our allies.
Ніхто не залишить. Тобто це візит, мабуть, більше мав важливість не стільки для українців, як куди приїхав, як посил для Росії. Це на мою думку.
Did you think a year ago that Ukraine would be in the position that it is in right now? I can remember talking with you right after the invasion began, and it was obviously a very tough conversation. But when you look back on it now, were you always confident that Ukraine would be able to hold on and persevere for as long as it has?
Як людина, я, звичайно, сподівався на те, що ми вже переможемо. Як
First of all, as a citizen of my country, I never had any doubts that we will stand strong and we are gonna win. Maybe a year ago, we didn't have a clear understanding how long it can last, this war. And we probably didn't know what will happen after 1 year after. Now we know that we are still fighting and it's still hard, but Ukrainian nation is a very brave nation and we will never leave our territory, our country. We will protect it and we will fight for the freedoms and for the freedoms that we have and we used to have. No doubts that we will continue our fight. Of course, as a person, I was hoping that we can win faster, but it's a year since the invasion and we are still fighting, but we will never give up.
Do you find that young journalists in Ukraine are energized and coming to the work of journalism as much now as they have in the past? In other words, what has the invasion and the events of the past year meant for journalism in Ukraine?
Ну, по-перше, треба сказати, що дуже багато молодих людей пішли в журналістику, тому що вважається дуже важливою зброєю.
So first of all, at the beginning of the war, a lot of young people, Ukrainian citizens, they became fixers. And now they started writing. So having no journalism background, never working in media, but now they are more and more involved in this information front. I always knew that a word is a very strong weapon, and we have our own front where we can do our best. And actually, since the beginning of the war, Ukrainian journalists were sharing the information with international media, and that's how we were getting the support from all over the world, because they heard what is happening in Ukraine through the eyes of Ukrainian journalists. And my friend who is now in the army, who is fighting for our independence, he once told me that you have your own front. This is your information front, and you have to do your job there.
What do journalists in Ukraine need?
Коли я був в Німеччині, у мене задали питання таке саме, да? Тобто я...
Well, I was asked the same question in Germany at my recent visit, and well, I don't know how to answer, but I will answer how I did in Germany. So first of all, I was telling them how the day of a journalist looks like in Ukraine now. So you wake up, means you are still alive. If there is an air raid siren, you go to the basement. Then when it's over, you go out, you look if your city still stands, if you have the electricity and internet, and if that's in place, you start writing your story or your news. And then if the electricity is still there, you will send it to your editor. And he has to edit and then send it to either newspaper or online. The editor has the same situation. He has to wake up, look around to see how the situation is, if there is electricity and internet, and do his job. The main point is that if you're alive, if you survived, you have to continue what you're doing and what you do best. So what is needed now? First of all, finance, because if you can't pay salaries to a journalist, they might leave, right? If you can buy equipment, they will not be able to perform to the best of their abilities. So financial support is number one still in Ukraine, because all the journalists, they do their best and they work not 100%, but 200% of their abilities.
This might be an excessively optimistic question, but when all this is over, what do you think Ukraine will look like?
Це дуже класне питання з точки зору того, що ми всі про це думаємо майже регулярно. І в той час, коли ми більш оптимістично налаштовані...
That's a great question, and everybody thinks about what will happen when we win. When we are optimistic, of course, we think how we will celebrate our victory day, how we will remember the heroes that gave their lives for our independence and our freedoms. But then reality comes, and we understand that there are a lot of cities that are either fully destroyed or partly destroyed, and we will need to put a lot of effort and money in reconstructing our country. And another thing will be how we get back people who left, those who were under occupation and who were forced to leave or who were taken to Russia, to other places, and also the refugees who fled the country to Europe. So we have a lot of people that we would like to have back. This is one thing. And then we will also think about a program to invite other refugees, not only Ukrainian refugees, but from other countries, because we think that the reconstructed Ukraine will be a very attractive country for other people to come and live. So we will have not enough rest, but as soon as we take a break, we have rest, we will continue to do this.
Відпочинемо і почнемо працювати знову на відновлення України. Це те, що ми повинні будемо зробити. Бо для мене це виглядає саме так. Поки так.
That's all I have. Anything else you want to share?
Мабуть, я скажу те саме, що
I would like to express one wish from myself. This is the same thing that I ask my foreign colleagues. Remind people about what is happening in Ukraine, because every day cost us a lot of lives of our great people. So I understand that people are tired of what is happening in Ukraine, right, of the bad news, but still, you don't have to remind them only about the visit of Biden to Ukraine, right? This is which was covered everywhere, but from time to time, and try to do it on a regular basis, remind that Ukraine is still fighting for its independence and still standing strong, because without your support, it becomes harder to fight for our freedom, and we are fighting against the evil that is threatening the whole world.
I can assure you that Ukraine will not fall out of the news pages of the Times Union anytime soon.
Thank you.
If you want to hear our conversations with Valery Garmash from last year, when the war was just beginning, visit timesunion.com/podcast. You can find them in our archive from March and April of 2022. After the break, we'll hear another segment from our brand new Times Union podcast, Rainwalker, the Lost Boy.
This podcast is supported by the Times Union, a newspaper of distinction winner by the Journalism Association of New York. Subscribe today to the Capital Region's award-winning news source at timesunion.com/subscribe.
Welcome back. You're listening to The Eagle, a Times Union podcast. I'm Jessica Marshall. We launched a brand new podcast in January. It's called Rainwalker, the Lost Boy. It explores the mysterious disappearance of 12-year-old Jalik Rainwalker. He vanished without a trace in 2007 from the Washington County village of Greenwich. His case was ruled a probable homicide, but no suspects were ever named. Our 7-part series delves into the life, disappearance, and 15-year search for Jalik. Here's a little bit of our 6th episode, which dropped this week. And just a warning, the subject matter may be disturbing to some, so please listen with care. Previously on Rainwalker, the Lost Boy. 4 months after Jalik disappeared, a letter arrived at the Times Union. Copies of this letter showed up in newsroom mailboxes around the region, too. It was anonymous, postmarked from Westchester County. That's 3 hours south of Greenwich. The letter was typed. It had typos and spelling errors. The grammar was inconsistent. It read, quote, Jalik still alive. Needed a foot soldier for this war on drugs. Picked him up, Route 40, Post 30. He's okay, no fake. He says ask his mama and papa, who are the Macaroni family? My cat named Diamond. Why does Franti yell fire? Don't try to look, we are not there. There are many elements of this letter that were scrutinized, but one stood out in particular for police. This letter says Jalik was allegedly picked up on Route 40, Post 30, the night that he disappeared. It's the corner of Route 40 and Hedgeman Bridge Road.
That's exactly where you turn. I want her to know that this, if you're coming from Latham This is where you turn. This is where we turn today, Jessica, to go into Greenwich.
Okay.
This is the turn
Gotcha.
to go to Hill Street.
Wendy and I are standing near post marker 30 on Route 40 near Hegeman Bridge Road. It's a three-way intersection where people frequently pull over, mostly to check their phones and directions. You can barely see the postmarker on the telephone pole. In the summertime, it's somewhat obscured by vegetation. You have to go right up to it to see the metallic numbers.
Okay, so this is marker 30. See this pole here?
Yep.
Has a 30 on it. This is where he said.
I realize I've made this turn at least 2 or 3 times on my way back and forth to Greenwich for this podcast. I didn't even realize it was that marker 30. The spot feels very much like the official entrance to the village, like you know you're finally there when you make this turn. It bridges the gap between the seemingly endless rural country roads and quaint village neighborhoods. And to me personally, it was a sign that I would finally come upon a much-needed gas station.
We came back and it was after dark because it was pulling in and seeing somebody over there but not knowing who it was. And that was the day before he
That was
became
the night.
missing.
That
So
was
that
the
was the
night
night.
of.
But I just remember there was a van going towards town.
That's exactly where you turn.
This is Sally. At least that's what we're calling her. She doesn't want to use her real name. She lives on the outskirts of Greenwich, near post marker 30. Back in the early days of the investigation, she told Cambridge Greenwich Police Chief George Bell that she saw something as she was returning to her house the night of November 1st, 2007. She says it looked like a van.
To go to Hill Street.
So it pulled in and it was parked like by where the pole was. And I remember coming in and you could hear that there was something going on. Maybe the light was on of the van or whatever. You could hear there was something going on in the car. When we got home, the dog, Max, he was a big, doofy brown dog, but he never barked. He wasn't a barker. And he barked most of that night. I kept looking out, and then that van was probably there for a period of time, 20 minutes, half an hour, something that was aware of, oh, it's still out there.
The anonymous letter sent in February of 2008 alleges that Jaliek was picked up by an individual or group of individuals at postmarker 30. Police say Jaliek's adoptive father, Stephen Kerr, told them he thought Jaliek could have run away to join a gang in Albany. It's a theory that police doubt.
I don't think there was any gangs coming up the road. And then we kind of laughed about, well, maybe the gangs were coming up, that's what the dog was barking at. Or maybe Jaliek was there, you know? So
Police say Stephen Kerr gave them several theories about where he believed Jaliek was, too, in those early days of the investigation. One was that he ran away to join a gang. Another was that he ran away to reunite with his birth family in Albany. Stephen Kerr told the Times-Union in 2008 that he believed Jaliek ran away to join the Black community in one of the region's 3 metro areas, Albany, Schenectady, or Troy. Retired state police investigator Tom Aiken confirmed that Stephen Kerr also gave them a theory that Jaliek may have been kidnapped by a religious cult that has an enclave outside of Greenwich. Another of his theories was that Jaliek was kidnapped and sold into sex slavery. Police say they've thoroughly investigated all of these possibilities. Tom Aiken and George Bell have both said on record that they did not believe any of them are credible. By this time, 4 months after Jaliek disappeared, police dubbed Stephen Kerr a person of interest in the case. The only person of interest in the case. That means they thought he had information that could help solve the case, or that they thought there was a possibility that he was involved somehow in his son's disappearance. Either way, the term carries no legal weight. But police were not shy in the following months about telling reporters they were investigating every detail Stephen gave them about what he says happened the night of November 1st. Stephen Kerr has never been charged with anything. He remains a person of interest in the case to this day. The final episode of Rainwalker, The Lost Boy, drops Tuesday morning, that's February 28th. You can listen and subscribe to the whole 7-episode series wherever you get your podcasts. All right, that's it for this week. I'm Jessica Marshall. We'll be back next week with another look inside the newsroom here at the Times-Union. In the meantime, check us out on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram, or head on over to timesunion.com for the latest news and features. The Eagle is a production of the Times-Union. It's produced and edited by me, Jessica Marshall, with help from the Times-Union digital team and the newsroom. Special thanks this week to Casey Seiler for his contributions to this episode.